Hello, everybody, and welcome! I hope you have been enjoying Survivor Week, and Daniel and I are here to record a very deep dive into something that is quite unique to the Survivor class. The Survivor XP Conundrum. We're going to dive into this in greater detail, and we're going to stop on... We have actually big slideshow. I think this is one of my biggest slideshows I've ever made on the channel. Not including the history ofs, which are currently the longest, but it is a giant slideshow. So I think we should dive in and get started. And feel free to jump in as I read through, because this is I'm going to kind of go in presentation mode. So you feel free to jump in whenever you want to chat about things as well. Roger. All right, let's dive in. Survivor's early identity was that all of their cards would cap out at level 3. So other classes, and even if we just look at the core set here, right? Survivor in the core set got Shotgun, like a 4 experience card that they were able to build towards, right? Seekers got the card draw one, which name is currently eluding me. Cryptic Research.
That's the one.
And Survivor, they got some 3 experience cards, right? So this was, it didn't seem strange at first. But then, as more cycles started to get released, Dunwich Legacy, Path to Carcosa, Forgotten Age, there was a trend that was starting to become apparent at that point. And it was that Survivors never got 4 or 5 experience cards. They just capped out at 3 XP. We saw this in early design where there were exile cards, with the idea was that Survivor didn't have to buy a big expensive card because they were buying Flare over and over and over again, or Stroke of Luck over and over and over again. So this was the theory in the design for the Survivor card pool, right? And it stayed this way for a very long time, and it wasn't until the Stella Clark Investigator pack came out that this all changed.
But let me ask you, I didn't play the game at the beginning, and you guys did from day one. As you like to say, you are Arkham boomers. The fact that there was only level 3 cards, when did you notice this? Was it just a joke? Was it something that you thought of as being part of the design, like the exile thing? Or was it just something you only realized later when you said, hey, what do I do with all this XP?
So that's a great question. I'm awful at noticing patterns. If there's if it's not specifically here is 1, 2, 3, 4, what comes next? I'm oh, it's going to be 5 because I'm counting up by 1. But Travis actually pointed out one day, he was Survivors don't have 4 or 5 XP cards. And that was a design choice, which Travis just said. And obviously at the time, I didn't know that it was, but it's just now so obvious in retrospect. Travis is very good at picking that stuff up, right? And then I was oh yeah, you're 100% right. Because the idea of running out of experience wasn't really a thing when you were playing with Dunwich and Carcosa, because those are very XP light campaigns, right? And even with Ashcan Pete, who I played through the Dunwich Legacy, I never really ran out of cards to upgrade because we weren't getting that much. And at that point, when the card pool was so small, it was just I want to try all of these things, you know? So there was less that going on for it. When Stella came out, though, it was pretty obvious because there were 3, which let's talk about these cards right here, that were level 4 or higher. 2 of them are permanents, Deja Vu and Quick Learner, the namesake of your channel. And then also Chainsaw, which was a big Survivor weapon to build towards. And I think a big reason why this wasn't too much of an issue, that wasn't too noticeable as well, is because there were not a lot of Survivors that were just mono Survivor, right? There was Ashcan Pete, and then in a way Kelvin Wright, but Kelvin didn't really have a lot of support when he first came out, so there wasn't that much that tapped into it. This is also the issue with Rita Young, where her card pool wasn't able to be supported by what existed, right? Rita Young, people played her with Chainsaw when she came out, but before that, you weren't really able to, do things. As we've said on the channel, Rita Young got so much juice from Edge of the Earth and Sweeping Kick, right? But there was so much building into your off class, which is, I think, pointing to this issue that we're going to be talking about in this video.
A really good point. I hadn't thought about that too much, about all of those investigators having, up until this point, having lots of other things to spend their XP on if they didn't get it from Survivor. And we're going to talk a little bit later about like what do you get from Survivor at those lower XP levels. I was kind of thinking about it in the reverse, that Tommy, Min, Agnes, they get a lot out of Survivor because there's so much that's in 0 to 2, that it's a really good point that Rita was looking for a lot from the 0 to 3 tricks, and Calvin got mostly from the same time period, right? The spirit events from Nathaniel Cho.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Chainsaw, Deja Vu, and Quick Learner were important because these 3 cards marked the first entries into the Survivor card pool that were level 4 or 5. And when these cards came out, they were immediately noticeable. We were like, oh, a level 4 Survivor card? That's crazy, right? And this was a big moment because they provided build-arounds or capstones to builds, now giving Survivor decks high-end identity. So this is a concept that Daniel and I are going to be talking a lot about this, the concept of build-arounds and also high-end identity. What we mean by that is a build-around is a card that you build your deck around. Survivor did have, they do have build-arounds at their lower level XP, right? For example, things like scavenging, right? That's a pretty big Survivor build-around that we're going to be talking about later. But at a certain point, you're not improving. Like with scavenging, you're not really improving your ability to scavenge. You're improving what you're scavenging for, right? So like it even follows into things we're going to talk about later, where like, are survivors upgrading their own build-arounds, or are they just upgrading everything around their build-around? And in that case, is it really a build-around, or is it just a value engine, right? Which is a very complicated thing. And then high-end identity is, for example, when someone says, I'm building around the Necronomicon in the Seeker class, or I'm building around a Runic Axe, or I'm building around the Red Clock, which are 3 cards we're also going to touch on later. These are all very notable things that are like, you spent probably upwards of 10 to 15 experience to get everything kitted out, and we know what that is doing. And Survivor doesn't really have that to the same extent on just like, at least up until this point, they started to get there. When someone says, I'm playing Deja Vu, you're like, oh, you're trying to exile things. When someone's playing Quick Learner, you're like, oh, you're looking to take extra actions so you can take more advantage out of your Quick Learner. And that's what the Stella Clark deck provided.
Yeah, it's interesting that these are the 3 we got because we'll get into this more later too, but these are 2 permanent cards. And then there's Chainsaw, which is, it's a weapon. And as far as build-arounds, I mean, you can build around Deja Vu, but it still feels like a weird card to, the exile mechanic we were talking about before, where you're re-spending XP on cards like Flare, Leather Code, and Cherish Keepsake came out in this set too. Now are you spending more XP just to not spend more XP to rebuy those cards? It doesn't feel like it's the same kind of build around as some other cards you get in other classes. Like it's not something. I mean, yes, you can have a Deja Vu deck, but what does that really accomplish in the scenario that these other cards and other classes can do? Chainsaw, yeah, you can do a Will York recursion chainsaw deck. That is definitely the identity of your deck. And Quick Learner certainly is a capstone to the difficulty manipulation mechanic that Survivor has. But like Deja Vu to me is a little bit of a whiff here as something that's really a I finally have 5 XP and my deck can do its thing because it has Deja Vu. I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, Deja Vu, I mean, we'll touch on this later in the video as well, but Deja Vu does have those issues for sure. And I think that it's potentially from the consequences are kind of coming from what we're going to be talking about for the rest of all this. I think it's a big domino effect. So, even though Survivor broke through and started getting level 4 and 5 cards, they still did so at a rate that was lower than the other classes. Turns out much lower, which I did not realize even after making this video, which we'll talk about the actual numbers later on in this video. But it turns out much lower. However, obviously level 3 was still the identity, so like this was like one of those things, and these cards, these level 4 and 5 cards, were the exception and not the rule. And I would argue, and I'm sure you wouldn't disagree, that that is the trend that continues even today into how things are releasing. What we're going to do is we're going to take a little walk back. We're going to a little bit of a baby history of here for the Survivor class. We're going to look at Innsmouth to Drowned City and talk about the level 4 or 5 cards that Survivor had available to them, and if they are on the same, how basically how impactful they were to the Survivor class and the Survivor class alone, because that's the subject of this video. So, first up, we got Dig Deep, a 4 experience card that you can spend resources to get more brain or more foot. So they gain 1 more, and this is an Innsmouth, they gain the 1 more 4 XP card. However, arguably this card is part of a cycle as opposed to a unique Survivor card. So would you agree that this is more of a thing that Survivors got because everyone got this, as opposed to Survivors getting this to kind of break this identity?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's like, what is the identity that you get for having Dig Deep level 4 in your deck anyway? It does a lot. It's a good card. Maybe not as good as the other ones in the cycle, but like, hooray, now you can pass more skill tests.
Yeah.
Great. But you're right. The other 4 classes got one of these at cost level 4. It was either through Innsmouth or through the starter decks, right? They weren't all in.
Yes. Yeah, they were split between the
Innsmouth.
2.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that's notable that I'm not going to be talking about here, but one thing that I think like this cycle, like this talent cycle is very good, like you said. But it's funny, in Survivor, I would see Plucky played a lot more than this card, right? And I think a big reason for that is just that the book is better for Survivors than the brain and the foot, right? But also, it's 1 experience cheaper, which does add up for the Survivor class when they're going to be buying a big gaggle of things in their weird way of doing things. In Innsmouth, 2 Guardian, 3 Seeker, 1 Rogue, and 5 Mystic that were level 4 or 5. One thing to keep in mind whenever we do this breakdown here is that Mystic and Seeker will skew a little bit higher because they usually have a spell cycle, if the Mystics, or the research cycle as a Seeker. However, one thing I'm going to argue to counter that point, maybe not so much for the Mystic class, but for the Seeker class, each one of those research designs are unique, attempting to make like kind of like a build around or like big payoff style design. So while it's, yes, there are in this Seeker, 2 of the 3 are cryptic
Grimoire.
Right? Yeah, cryptic grimoire. They're like different cards that you can try to build around in that way.
We've done it.
We've done it, exactly. All right, next up we got Edge of the Earth, where they got 4 level 4 or more upgrades here. However, you might notice something. They all are the dual class cards. So Daniel, let me ask you, I'll let you take this one first. Do you think these cards count for what we're talking about? Or are they bending the Survivor rule for multi-class identity?
No, this was just a design choice for the box that they needed X number of cards for each class and each combination of classes. So here's what we got. I mean, they don't even feel like they're Survivor cards in the first place. They're just like extra. I mean, Precious Memento's got extra soak. That's good. But I always feel a little, uneasy talking about any of these cards as being just a particular identity from each of those classes. They're kind of a weird combination, but it's like we get them for free, right? It's not really part of a Survivor build around anymore. It's just like, here's some extra thing that you could take. And I think we have a very similar answer for the next box as well.
Yes, yeah. And then to go with what you're saying is that, the only thing that really feels Survivor in these cards is Precious Memento cares about failing for one of its options, right? Which is kind of loose, but that is the Survivor thing. But it's not really, I agree, it doesn't really scale up to what we dream for the Survivor high end. Sledgehammer level 0 is a Survivor card because it's a 2-handed weapon that deals damage with a downside. That is a Survivor thing, right?
Yes.
But the upgrade that's not Survivor at all. That's like we're looking at like just this weird guard. I mean, it's a weird multi-class card that comes from this. Keeping this going, compared to the other classes, 7 Guardian, 8 Seeker, 6 Rogue, 6 Mystic. This does include multi-class cards for each of them, but interestingly, each other class received a non-dual class level 4+ card. Survivor was the only class that did not receive something here. Which is just, when I was putting this video together, I felt like I was in front of like a conspiracy board being like, wait a minute, there's so much going on here. And as you said, this continues into the Scarlet Keys, where these were the only cards that the Survivor class could take that would hit level 4 or 5. The 3 customizable cards, Pocket Multi-Tool, Makeshift Trap, and Grizzled. So, do we consider these to be level 4 and 5 cards? This is a very interesting question. And then on top of that, like the dual class cards, are these only here because it was the identity of the cycle? I think we both agree on that point. Yes, this was here because this is the identity of the cycle. Do you personally consider these to be level 4 or 5 cards?
Yeah, this one I feel more that they could be considered level 4 and 5 if you, of course, check 8 to 10 boxes. Because they are quite strong. They do quite a bit. But it's weird because they're different, right? When you have them at level 0 or 2 or 3 or whatever, they still do a lot and they still feel like kind of the same card for all of these. They don't actually drastically change, other than the Pocket Multi-Tool being a lucky when you put a bunch of XP into it. They all still feel like, I hate to say they feel like level 0 cards, but they don't change their functionality so much. And I think about the other customizable cards in this regard too, if they still kind of feel like what they do at lower levels. But I think they work perfectly fine at level 2 and 3, that they still kind of feel like lower level cards.
Yeah, that's the kind of where I am too, is I think that, like, for example, Pocket Multi-Tool and Grizzled are good cards. I like putting them in my deck. Makeshift Trap, I've built decks with it, and I think it is a very functional, good card in the right deck. But when I look at these 3 cards, to their benefit, I think they're better designed than some of the other customizable cards, because there's no like, oh, I need to put 6 XP, 6 like check marks into this before I really can start paying dividends from the card, you know?
Absolutely.
And I think that goes into the kind of the low level Survivor thing where they function very well. But then I think because they lose some of that identity that the higher end cards on the other classes have.
And it's also just that we are talking about these level 4 and 5 cards as being capstones to a particular deck archetype, a concept for what you're trying to do with an investigator, that not being able to do that thing until you can sink 4 to 5 XP into a card is meaningful. The fact that you get like a baby version of these from the get-go makes it feel a little bit less like, here's a capstone.
Yep.
And I know that like you can make the same argument about, say, level 0 shriveling and level 5 shriveling, but I don't know. I feel like the difference between those cards, the big mystic cards, is that they do so much more damage per action that it feels like, okay, here my whole deck concept was using spells, fighting with these assets, but my high end is so much different than the low end that it feels like a real level 5 card. Yep. These, I don't know about that.
Yeah, and even just like looking at customizable themselves, 10 XP in a runic axe goes a lot further than 10 XP in a Pocket Multi-Tool. And yes, they are different because one takes up 1 hand slot, right? But I think it's because of the other classes have that high experience identity. I do feel like that was brought into the design against the Survivor cards because of this whole high XP survivors don't touch it style thing. All right. Oh, no, sorry. This one, compared to the other classes, I got to talk about this as well. There were 5 Guardian, 5 Rogue, 5 Seeker, 4 Rogue, 5 Mystic, and this does count the customizable cards. So basically, you can subtract 3 from each of these to get the non-customizable version of these. But again, each class besides Survivor received non-customizable level 4+ cards, which is very interesting.
The Rogue one? Was that Clean Sneak? Was that Scarlet Keys?
Yeah, that was Clean Sneak. Yeah.
Nah, they didn't get anything this time.
That is true. Yeah, we're not promising that all these cards are good. We're talking about just the numbers of them here. That is true. This was the clean sneak cycle. All right. Feast of Hemlock Vale, survivors received a proper level 4+ card that was unique from any connecting mechanic of the cycle, which I think was huge, because this feels like the first time in a while that survivors got a card that I think was uniquely impactful to them. Because it gave survivors a build around to focus on while upgrading, the first since the Stella Clark pack. It was also cool because this was a card that was survivors' like first archetype from Dunwich Legacy to now have something you can upgrade into, made the archetype like expanded and grow because of that, which I thought was pretty cool. Compared to the other two the other classes, there were 4 Guardian, 4 Seeker, 2 Rogue, and 2 Mystic. Seeker did get the 3 of the Myconid for this one. So again, but they all are functionally very different than each other. Maybe the Mythos one and the like the Treachery and the Enemy ones are close, but like the Health one is its own, like the Soak one is its own like separate design from that. And then most recently, we got the biggest build around that survivors have seen in a while, which is Gift of Nodens. So a very strong card, and also not an upgrade version of something else. But I think what I'm going to make a slight prediction here. I feel like survivors are going to get 1, 4, or 5 XP card in boxes going forward. I just feel it in my bones that that's going to be the case. I think with after Dark Horse and Gift of Nodens, I feel like the designers want to expand the survivor class that goes with this and just like give them a bit more juice. I could be wrong, but as I said, I felt like a conspiracy theorist making this video, and that's my new conspiracy theory to follow.
I hope so, because it's really good.
It is, yeah, it is very, and it's also, I think, very nice for the class. I think it's also going to be really good for Current, which we're also going to talk about later in the video. I don't want to put too much before the end of this. Compared to the other classes, there was 1 Guardian, 4 Seeker, 3 Rogue, and 1 Mystic. I'm not going to break down the specialist cards because there's a lot to unpack there, but a notable point is that there are no specialist cards for Drifter at level 4+. That is like, sounds like I might just be cherry picking something, but you're going to be surprised at how many survivors are drifters. And I do think that this carried over into that identity that we had here. Turns out a lot of the drifter specialist cards are actually really good. And I think that's because, again, of the survivor thing where the lower XP cards can be pretty impactful because they're kind of designing it. I would argue that some survivor cards that we're going to be talking about later on would cost 1 experience more if they were in another class.
So I think that Gifted Nodens is a really good example of what we would be looking for in a high-end capstone, right? It doesn't exist at level 0, really. It's something you're working towards. It's a payoff for an archetype, a couple archetypes, really, in the class. Discard synergy, skill synergy, right? It's just a really solid, okay, now I can do a lot extra with my whole deck, right? It's so impactful. And it's not permanent, right? The other ones we saw are permanent, except for Chainsaw, I think, and then the customizable ones. So I feel like this is a nice balance to that. It's not just, I feel like some of the permanent ones are, we're upgrading your investigator base ability, and this is really a regular card in your deck, like what other classes get.
Yes, yeah. All right, so now that we've gone through up to Drowned City, what are the total counts, Daniel, of all the 4 or 5 experience cards for all the classes?
Yeah, so, and this again includes the multi-class and the kind of nonsense with the Seeker research cards. So we've got 13 cards, as well as the customizable one, so you can subtract 3 if you care about that. We have 13 for Survivor. 13, that's it. In Guardian, we have 33. In Seeker, we have 43. In Rogue, we have 26. And Mystic, we have 36.
So again, big difference.
In Survivor, we have 13. And it's actually worth saying that in Neutral, there's 21 cards, and this includes the specialist cards too. So,
oh, that is pretty funny. That is pretty funny. So even if we just look at this number, Rogue has twice as many as Survivor, and that's the next closest. And also with people who know Rogue is they're a little bit different as well. They have the exceptional cards as like one of the keywords that was originally very much just theirs. And survivors, so like really rogue's number is a little bit inflated, but we're not including it just because, again, it's a little bit messy. We're looking at just like level 4 and 5 for doing this. But even without any exceptional cards, rogue has twice as much as survivor. And then if you take away the customizable and the dual class cards, the numbers go down for all of these, but then survivor only has six that are uniquely just like theirs, which is kind of actually pretty crazy.
We're talking about how many years of the game now? Like almost 10 years? And
yeah,
I don't know how many boxes it is, like 11 or 12 now.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. All right, so that was all the setup. So now we're going to start getting into some discussion points with this. So since the Stella Clark Investigator deck, I'd argue, and you can agree or disagree if you want, I'll give you a floor to stand on in a second, but the survivors have only received 2 level 4+ cards that added something unique to just their card pool. Is that supposed to say 2? 2. Okay, I have to go back and look this up for what I was saying here. I guess it was Gift of Nodens, and Gift of Nodens and Quick Learner. That's it. Yeah, because Dark Horse has always been here. Dark Horse has always been here. Deja Vu, well, it does, no one actually plays it, right? I would say that Gift of Nodens and Quick Learner are the only 2 cards that we actually have seen starting to form a deck that has not already existed in some form. You would even argue that earlier in this game, Exile was still a mechanic that people would build because they would just spend the XP as opposed to buying Deja Vu. Because as you said earlier, are you putting more XP that you're going to be spending into buying Deja Vu than you would get otherwise, right?
So I would agree. I think those were the 2 cards. I wasn't sure if you were going to put your choices on the screen, but those are the ones. Quick Learner, warps your deck building, probably. And so does Gift of Nodens. It really informs what you're doing with your deck. I have a quick sort of side question for you at this point, too. Just so, we said the identity of survivors to this point was level 3 cards. Do you think there are hapstones at level 3 that survivor gets that also makes them unique, right? Or is it just like, here's some good stuff? Because I feel like there's a lot of Will to Survive, Trial by Fire. What's the one that pulls things back? True Survivor, right?
Yeah,
they're good cards, but
I think True Survivor is probably the closest. I'm actually going to put the next on here because I think this is a great little thing here. They received a lot of support in the level 1 to 3 cards, which has always been the case. But I think apart from maybe like True Survivor, it's mostly just good stuff, right? Like survivors just upgrade their decks to be better, but it's less like building around a specific like archetype that comes with it, right? That's like my thought on it. It is mostly just like get your deck better by just making things better. So this does bring us to our other issue for this video, which is where we're going to spend a good chunk of time on as well. Because most of their stuff has been level 1 to 3 cards, survivors and spending XP is a very interesting kind of push and pull that this game has always had. There's a notable trend. It's been like this since, not, like I said, not Dungeon Carcosa, but I imagine once Forgotten Age came around, and like that was a campaign that had a massive jump in XP compared to the other 2. Their survivors have a trend for upgrading their deck early. Most recently happened when we were playing Drowned City. We started to get experience on like scenarios 5, 6, 7, and Bryn was like, stop. I'm done. I don't need more. And this was with a forced learning George Barnaby deck, right? But it's true. You just like run out of stuff pretty quick. So they add a few cheap build-arounds, a few consistency cards, and a few power cards, and before they know it, their deck is finished after only spending 12 XP. The other classes often need to spend double that to hit the same level of deck completion. Now, I'm not talking about this in like a power level thing, right? Like, it's not like, what is the power level here? But just the fact that, like, for example, a Dark Horse deck, you spend 5 XP on buying permanent Dark Horse. And I would argue at that point, even though there are upgraded versions of your Fire Axe and your Mariner's Compass, your deck is done. You might just want to spend another 3 XP to grab a Scrapper, a permanent way to spend resources. But with 8 XP, you're now like, okay, now how do I make things better because my deck is finished, right? And like that's a very weird thing that's unique to the Survivor class.
Yeah, so this happened to me too when I was playing George in the Drowned City, and my measure for like when is the deck done is at what point do I buy Observe?
Yeah. That is a good metric for when the deck is finished, yeah.
Because that's 4 XP, right? Neutral card that basically means I'm getting some interesting stuff the rest of the campaign. And I think it was like probably around then, like scenario 5, where I was like, what else could I possibly do to add to my deck that doesn't like ruin kind of the synergies that are already there? And that's part of why when I talk about having a capstone, like you're working in other classes to make the deck happen. And you don't need that much for the deck to do what it wants to do in Survivor. And it's interesting why that is. A lot of the power is at level 0 and level 1 or so. The level 3 cards, kind of mentioned this a few minutes ago, feel like they are just greasing the wheels a bit, but they're not actually adding functionality. Especially when, I mean, I guess it maybe depends on what kind of investigator you're playing, but I felt like even with, I mean, it's maybe especially with George, he draws so much that you can find all of the cards pretty quickly. So you're not having to, you know, even in Seeker, right? You put 4 XP into cryptic research and you're like, okay, great. Now I can find all the cool stuff that I put in the decks a little bit more easily. But you don't need to do that in Survivor. It'll just probably happen.
Oh, not only will it not just happen, they have short supply, which lets them draw 10 more cards into their opening hand, quote unquote, right? Like that's something that I think is going to actually let's jump to the next slide because I think this carries over really well into that point here. But Survivor has a lot of powerful low-level cards in their pool, which is, I think, a consequence of their class identity capping out at level 3 for the longest time. Like, Brute Force is a very powerful skill. In other classes, like they don't have the recursion, so maybe it would still cost 1, right? 1 XP. But like I think looking at newspaper is a good example. Newspaper actually reads very plain, right? It's just an extra clue, right? And as I've talked about in a recent video, you just want to find a way to get an extra clue, right? Because positive tempo is good. But if you really strip newspaper down, this is actually, the card is asking so little of you for 2 XP, right? 1 resource and a hand slot. And like, that's it. And I think like in other classes, if it costs 2 XP, they would add more to the cost, or maybe it would be the same, but would be 3 XP, right? And I think that's one of the things that is kind of this Survivor thing that comes with it. Peter Sylvester is busted for a 2 XP ally, right? Like his rate is so good, and I think a big reason for this is that it's like Lola Santiago. Lola Santiago is a very good ally. I think Peter Sylvester is very close on the same level in terms of how it's able to help you change the state of the game when you play it, right? But when 3 XP is the Survivor's 5 XP, Peter Sylvester can't be 3 XP. He'd be 2 XP.
It's interesting if you compare to other classes that same 2 XP price point. So Wit and Green is actually a fairly recent card compared to Peter, but her level 0 is fine. It gives you just +1 book, costs you 4, gives you 2/2 soak. You search the top 6 when you reveal a new location for a tome or relic. Okay, her 2 XP addition is you get +1 brain, and you increase the search to 9, and you increase the sanity to 3. That's it. I mean, it's not bad. That's actually a quite good upgrade. But for 2 XP, you don't get any sort of cost reduction. You don't get any extra functionality, really. It's just better. And you look at newspaper, and the functionality between level 0 newspaper and level 2 is absurd.
Yeah.
And I think even Peter Sylvester, you can make the remark that, yeah, he adds +1 skill, just like Wit and Green does, but the extra sanity means that now you can assign 2 horror to him and never die.
Yep. Just never
That's nuts.
die. Yeah, yeah. Scavenging and Old Keyring are two examples of cards that have now been tabooed, if you're playing with the taboo list, to cost 4 XP for both of them, right? Scavenging 2 got a +2, Scavenging 0 got a +2, but Old Keyring got a +1, right? Which is showing that if these cards were designed, I mean, Old Keyring is at a point where, like, these level 4 XP cards, it could have been 4 XP, right? Because Scarlet Keys is pretty late. We've started to see more. But because of the hesitance to make Survivor cards cost, like, be level 4 or 5, I think that some cards slip through the cracks when they should have been more experience, right? Because I think that Old Keyring is good at for level 4. I think, like, that's, like, the perfect level for it. At level 3, especially coupled with Scavenging, was just, like, a little bit too much, right? But at level 4, it feels like the right amount for the ability to play it and take advantage of it, and then in the Survivor way, take advantage of it more, which we're going to be talking about on the next slide. All right, next slide here, keeping this going. To add fuel to the fire, a lot of level 0 Survivor cards do a good job of enhancing their experience cards without needing to add more cards to their deck. I don't know why Act of Desperation and Scavenging look like they've been in the sun, but there's some sun damage on those ones here. They probably have changed their filter on them. But this also adds to this, where survivors do more with less because they have ways to recur things. I think True Survivor is a great example, right, of why that felt like such a good survivor, like, archetype, is because one of the cards you bring back by design, because they're from the same cycle, is resourceful, right? So then you use that resourceful to bring back True Survivor, and then you just, like, keep doing that again and again and again. But I think, like, resourceful, and to a lesser extent Scrounge for supplies, and to a big extent Scavenging, showcase that Survivor are able to take multiple uses out of their things. So you don't even need to go to the level 2 Scavenging to be able to loop your Old Keyrings, like, almost forever, right? Your Old Keyrings 3. So the kind of, like, it has, like, a compounding effect where, because XP is so low, Survivor's power level is kind of just, like, squished, where maybe if it was big from the start, this wouldn't have been so apparent, and these effects wouldn't have seemed so, the recursion wouldn't have seemed so busted.
Yeah, so to me, the scaling that Survivor decks do, based on these level 0 cards, right? As you say, they're enhancing the experience cards. That's why it feels like at scenario 4 or 5, my deck is done, because it is not hard to get even more use out of those high XP cards, again, level 3 or so, because it's impossible not to use them more than once, right? It's not like some event that you get to play in Mystic or whatever and you're done with it. You have Resourceful, that it acts as that force multiplier on your whole deck. So what are you looking for to try to make your deck better? It's already in your deck. Resourceful, Scrounge for supplies to some extent, Scavenging for sure. Anything else that, I mean, we can go back to Gifted Nodens in a second too, but basically says, okay, anything that was good, already pretty good at level 0, it's even better, because now you can do so much more with it. In this George deck I played, it shouldn't be unknown, because you can do this in basically every investigator that has Survivor access, but I looped Alter Fate 3, and it was just disgusting. It was like, okay, I play this, I then, like, there were some nasty treacheries on the board. I play Alter Fate for 1 resource, it's fast. Gets rid of a treachery. Goes in the discard pile. I take a test, Resourceful, get back the Alter Fate, get rid of another treachery. This would have cost us, like, 2 actions to get rid of these treacheries a piece. And then I take some other test, you know, use Gifted Nodens, use Resourceful again, get Alter Fate back again, and now we've basically collectively saved ourselves an entire round of getting rid of nasty things, just because I could loop a couple of cards in Survivor. And it just means that keeping those level 0 cards is fine, because they become even more useful.
Yeah. And I think that is the big thing is, I imagine that it was a conscious choice I mean, we know it was a purposeful design choice to have survivors cap at 3 XP, right? And I wager a part of that was because of recursion, right? Survivors have had recursion since the core set. It's in their identity. And as Travis often says on our channel, one of the most dangerous things in card games is recursion. The ability to play things out of the place where things are supposed to go when you cannot use them anymore always usually leads to broken experiences. And then it's, I think, even, again, as I said, compounded. Alter Fate 3, I think in another class would be 4 experience. The card is actually kind of wild, right? Like, it's just 1. And it's fair if you play it once. It's at 3 XP, it's reasonable. But now there are so many ways to play that card multiple times. It's like Last Chance 3, which we're also going to touch on. I brought... I know we're all talking about George Barnaby, but I think George Barnaby is on the cusp of becoming a new, like, S+ investigator with certain builds. I played the same Last Chance 3 10 times. If I could, in another class, play Perception 2 10 times, I'd be playing Amanda Sharp, and we all know how good she is, right? Like, that's, like, what Survivor is able to do. We haven't touched on Active Desperation here, but if you go back to the start of this video when we're talking about Chainsaw and how Yorick is able to recur Chainsaw, right? Yorick can still use Active Desperation and Chainsaw to his advantage to recur it even easier, right? But what Active Desperation does, in combination with Resourceful, is allows other investigators to also recur their Chainsaw. And that is one of those things that, while every class, they can all kind of, like, do the same thing. Survivors, by design, are jack of all trades, and their tools are really good at just getting them to that point. And the bottom line is that Survivor, like, the Survivor cards aren't played once, they are played multiple times. That's just the reality of the Survivor card pool.
Yeah, I remember seeing, just kind of discussions of how good investigators can be. And York, I think, and Daryl, for that matter, because they can recur assets, they also kind of ignore parts of the encounter deck that worry about discarding assets or dealing damage or horror. Like, you can have a couple of copies of scavenging in play, recur your leather coats, cherish keepsakes, and it's just a little nutty because, as you say right here, it's not one-time use. These are played, and they're so cheap too, and they didn't cost you any experience points, right? All of those patterns are just there from the get-go. You just get better at them later on. Well, I mean, I think even Daryl can run the scavenging build because he's got 5 book, right? Yeah. He can just succeed by 2 every round. And
like what you're saying is, in that situation, like, for example, in the leather coat and cherished keepsake with scavenging, if you upgrade to the level 2 scavenging, it's those level 0 cards get so much, because they're better because they're fast. You can now just play them as part of the scavenging. So it's now like you added 2 XP onto those cards, because we see from Survivor upgrades, 2 XP can sometimes mean fast, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
There are some positives and negatives, though, with everything we're talking about. So let's talk about another positive. So how does this affect Survivor XP scaling? On the low end, Survivors have an advantage. Compare this to the Mystics, who need 6 XP to make their Shriveling better, but they still need to have methods of finding those cards, which requires or is improved by spending XP, right? I think this is, like, really big for what we were saying earlier, like when a Survivor has done their deck at 12 XP. 8 XP for Dark Horse, and at that point now it's just like getting your deck more improved. It's something that we used to talk about in deck building. Get your foundation, and then it's all meat and potatoes. And Survivors are eating, like, nothing but meat and potatoes after Scenario 2, which is good, but also bad. On the opposite end, on higher XP campaigns, Survivors will stagnate and have a much lower ceiling. The theory for this was that when it came to Scenario 8, your Ashcan Pete, who was really good in Scenarios 1 to 4, he's kind of hit a plateau, right? And now the other classes who are using their Red Cloth, their Necronomicon, or the Runic Axe are able to have a better shot in those final scenarios.
Yeah, this is such an interesting topic where people, maybe fixate too much on the top end, right? And say, well, what can I do with the Survivors? And, how much of your campaign really is at that level? Are we talking about 1 scenario, 2 scenarios? Are they not able to win? Or is it just that you start to notice this because now, your rogues, your seekers are making up for all of that. Now they have so much more that they can do that you're just kind of watching them play their turns for 15 minutes while you're, maybe not doing quite as much anymore. I don't know. Like, this is a tough discussion for me. I'm really curious what you have to say on it too, since I know you love Survivor, but often the knock on Survivor is, well, what else can you do? You've already seen what you can do in the first couple of scenarios. Can you outscale the game by the time the end of the campaign comes around? And I don't know, what are your thoughts on you've played so much. What's your experiences felt like?
I feel like this was truer when the card pool was smaller. But at this point now, I think that at level 0... So, I think that the level 0 Survivor is so strong that the high end feels less high. Right, so like what's Seeker, like when we say about high end too, like it's really like Survivor rogues, they're hitting this at like scenario 4, right? Like it's not like scenario 8 you finally have bought your red clock and you're able to do your thing, right? It's just like it takes you a bit more time to get there. Survivors get there quicker, and I think at this point now, when there is more things that you can upgrade into that just make your deck better. We're going to talk about these cards in a few seconds, but Last Chance 3, Lucky 3, that are just like here to just be amazing cards, you feel that less, right? Because you're impacting the game by just having your deck be more consistent, like every other class. Survivor consistency has gotten better. They got a big thing and nothing left to lose, right? But while that is a good card, I think that card doesn't factor in the idea that you may never be behind. There are Survivor decks I play where I go down to like 3 resources and hover around 6 cards in hand, right? And I think that's just like how the things have grown from there. I think Nothing Left to Lose is still a good card, but I think now Survivors are able to build in ways that they don't need those cards as much. So I think it's very interesting where the card pool has made it so Survivors, this gap feels smaller than it used to.
It's interesting because I think especially in the Round City, we got really, really good level 0 Survivor cards. Like, you get the nautical charts, you get contemplative. Like, there's just so much stuff. Lawrence Carlisle, where you're saying, I'm ready to go. Like, I can already do everything I wanted to do. Where, Red Clock just is a nutso card. And you can just look at it and see how much it does. It might give you a resource and +4 skill value every turn. And then you can pass whatever tough test might be out there. Maybe you let it go and get yourself some more money. You get a bunch of free moves. You get a bunch of free actions. And Survivor's still kind of doing the same thing they were doing at level 0, which was really, really good. It's interesting to sort of note, like, what kind of deck are you playing? Do you need these higher end cards or not? And I think for a lot of Survivors, maybe it feels that they stagnate because they already saw what they can do. And maybe they need, I don't know. I've always felt like movement is the missing piece in Survivor. There's been track shoes, but it's sort of an unreliable movement and not exactly the free move you get from a couple of these cards on the screen.
Yes.
That lets you kind of get even more actions, right? There's nothing in Survivor that gives you extra actions for anything really. It's Lifeline, I think, the one that says
and End of the Road. That's the only
End of the Road, right?
Yeah.
And they're not reliable, right? So you count the number of actions you have. This is how many you're going to get forever, and that's kind of it. So movement is sort of the way to make up for that. Whereas I think every other class, maybe Guardian doesn't, and maybe Mystic a little bit less, has reliable ways of accomplishing even more. And like I think you see busted decks in Seeker and Rogue, especially because they can amass these incredibly long turns and do even more. And I don't think Survivor gets that. And maybe that's okay.
We're actually, that's a very interesting you bring up, because Bound for the Horizon is available to a lot of Survivors, and I'm curious to see how that card changes the Survivor gameplay, because you're 100% right. Like, Survivors have insane efficiency and ability to like mitigate any risk and like get cards back, but they have to move like a normal person, right?
Yeah.
And now they might not have to.
Right. That was to me the missing piece in George. That was the okay. Now I
Yep.
can actually accomplish so much more because not only do I get a benefit from discarding, but now I'm moving like no one's business.
Yeah.
But the other part to me is that a lot of Survivor good stuff is about you don't fail tests. You've got so many ways to mitigate failing a test. But especially on standard difficulty, the rest of the classes, once they have a bunch of XP, don't have that problem either.
Yes.
And what is the niche that survivors have at that high XP? They don't get that over the other classes anymore. Because I mean, you can look at these cards, right? Red Clock gives you +4. Necronomicon, you can just spend secrets to get +2 as many times as you want. And Runic Axe gives you an absurd skill bonus too.
Runic Axe, what it also does, which kind of helps to mitigate failing, is the Glory, which allows you to just like tank treachery cards, right? It's a very interesting question, and I think that what also comes with it too is that survivors are. So there's a very important thing in like the first scenario where you want to get a good foundation and XP on the first scenario, right? And survivors are very good at that because their level 0 decks are very strong, right? And it is interesting because they kind of like get the foundation, but they don't need it as much as the other classes, but they're very helpful to those other classes. Because it is true, outside of like the spike perspective, there is a big loss in like the higher end part of the deck where it's just like, what am I doing that's like interesting and not just survivor good stuff, because there's a lot of survivor good stuff. All right, let's this actually goes into, we have a bunch of questions we're going to just throw to ourselves and also for you at home to think about as we go to close out this video. When I say close out, I have no idea how long these questions are going to take us. There are a lot of them, but this is the reaching down to the conclusion of the video. So let's go with the first one, which I think we've been starting to talk about. Does this unique aspect of the class identity do a good job of making the survivor class feel distinct from the other classes? What do you think? It's a tough one.
I mean, is this a good identity to have? Man, like you said, you didn't notice it until Travis mentioned it. I didn't really notice this either until you start to play, maybe these high XP campaigns. And I'm sure plenty of people noticed this. It's been in discussion for a long time, but is this the way I want a class to feel distinct, that you don't have access to higher level XP cards? No. I think my answer is like no, but I don't like it, but I think it's true that it is a design philosophy that is at least interesting. I wonder if it would have been better. It sounds strange, but the game has lasted so long. I wonder if the game had only lasted 5 or 6 years, that this would feel more balanced with a smaller card pool. Maybe this is coming to another question you have here, because I feel like with a large card pool, it's so easy to spend XP in all the other classes that I feel like I'm missing something here still. Even though I know that the deck is already good and does everything I want it to do, I feel like, no, I want to keep engaging with this part of the game. Spending XP is so fun. Upgrading your deck is so fun. I don't particularly like Exile because I think it's kind of boring to say goodbye to a card and then rebuy it again. Like, that's no fun.
Yeah.
So those are my thoughts.
I think my answer for this one is kind of similar to yours. I think there are other things that makes the survivor class feel more distinct, and we're going to talk about it on a slide coming up in the future. But I think that this was an interesting thing for them to try, right? Like at the start, to just be like, okay, so like, because restrictions can breed creativity, right? But I don't know if they did enough with it after just like the concept. We're just kind of like, here's our idea. Survivors, they don't get anything that costs 3 or more XP. And then at a certain point, they were probably like, wow, that's really actually like not healthy in the long term, so let's give them a few. So I think that's like why I said, where I feel like in the future we're going to see like a 1, 4, or 5 XP for Survivor going forward. It's like, here's your cool thing to play with, especially with changes to the format coming up. But I think that I don't think it does a good job of making the Survivor class feel distinct, because I think ultimately it doesn't really matter when you start to get a full collection. I think like when you have one cycle, you don't notice it. 2 cycles you don't notice it, 3 cycles you don't notice it, 4 cycles your card pool is getting big enough that like you have enough pieces to put together that it's not really a thing anymore.
And I get the balance idea, right? That they have as powerful level 0, level 1, recursion. So maybe that was their way of saying, okay, we can make this be powerful, but they don't get the top end stuff. But again, as you said before, recursion is so dangerous with a larger card pool, especially that. Was that a good gamble?
Yeah,
I don't know.
And I think also, as I was saying, it kind of shrunk the thing where 3 is 5 for Survivor, and there might have been some cards that should have been 4 but snuck through at 3 because of that, right?
Yeah.
Like I think old Keyring 3 is an example of that. That should have probably been a 4 XP card printed, and it would have been better because of that.
Well, Shed of Light, right?
Shed of Light, yeah. Also, like,
0.
yeah, that should have been also like a 1 XP card, right? Just from printed, because I don't know. It's strange. All right, is there a problem with finishing the upgrade of your decks for your deck's concept early and then just improving the cards around it? Me as a Spike, I say no, because Last Chance 3 was the card I was most excited about in this cycle, even more than Enraptured. I think Enraptured is an incredibly strong card, but when I saw Last Chance, I was like, I'm playing this for 1 skill icon, because it's just that good for survivors. And this is something that's the same with Lucky 3. Lucky 3 is a crazy powerful card. Eucatastrophe is another thing that people will just put into the survivor decks just to have. Is there a problem with finishing the upgrade of your deck's concept early and then just improving the cards around it?
Okay, my answer is going to be yes. I agree with what you said, but yes in the sense that I kind of feel like every survivor deck is feeling a bit samey now. Because there's very few things that make them distinct. I've put in Plucky 3 in like 5 different investigators.
Yeah.
The card is so good. You can put Lucky in. You can put Eucatastrophe, Last Chance, right? All of these cards are going to do exactly what they say for every investigator. And one thing that's nice about having level 4 or 5 cards that are build-arounds is they change the archetype that your deck needs to work towards.
Yep.
And I think a lot of, I mean, I could even put Dark Horse in almost every, it costs nothing to put in, right? 5 XP, a permanent card.
And then sometimes you just get value.
Right. Sometimes you just spend all your money. And Scrapper as well. Like, these are permanent cards that just are additions to your investigator ability. And if you want to use them, great. If you don't. But there's no opportunity cost for those. A lot of these cards don't really either because they're so strong, but I wish that I could gear my deck more towards, okay, this is the special thing I can do now, rather than just have either I'm running old key rings, chainsaws, maybe some other weapon or investigation thing, and then the rest of the deck is just filled with a bunch of good stuff. I think that it's just so easy to do that. I mean, Plucky, it's so good, but
it is very good.
It feels a little boring after a while, always running the same cards.
Yeah, and I think that this is also, I think that the solution for this is to keep this. I think the Survivor card pool at this point now is always going to finish their decks early, but I feel like the solution is to have them finish it 2 scenarios later, right? So, and they do that by giving more 3 XP and 4 XP cards that are interesting to build around, right? Like, they can't always go for 5, but like even just a 4 XP thing that's like interesting for Survivor to be like, ooh, I want to take this. And then suddenly now you need like 2 4 XP cards, 2 3 XP cards, and then like maybe another like 2 XP cards to just like get your foundation for this idea going, right? And at that point now, you have, what was that, 8, 14, 18 experience, which is a lot lower than the 8 and 12 we were talking about earlier. I think this is a good reason why the customizable cards are nice, because my Never Fail Ashcan Pete deck, I had to put in down the rabbit hole because it's so good to, like, I want to buy so many things. And that deck always feels like it's evolving, and it's kind of like the exception to this Survivor rule of upgrading.
Here's another kind of weird point I wanted to bring up at some point, which is when you have cards that are still really good at level, say, 2, and maybe 3, but mostly 1 and 2, and you want to put 2 copies of them in, and you kind of look at them and you're like, I don't know if this is really good enough for my deck to warrant taking out 2 level 0 cards and putting in 2 copies of these things that are, I mean, they're good, but sometimes you want a little bit more oomph in your power of the deck, and putting in, I have to come up with a good example of which cards they might be, but sometimes putting in a level 1 or 2 card feels like it's the cost of the deck slot is not being outweighed by the power of the card as much. And putting in a level 4 card, or even 3 or 5 for sure, feels better. You're like, okay, I'm going to get a lot more value out of this because I have so much XP to spend. I'm not wasting it on something that is only a little bit lower of a power level.
This is actually something that I think is very interesting that I see happen with Survivor all the time. And I think it's positive because it's good for like team play, but I think actually if you really strip it down, this is a net negative for the class and the card pool. But how many times have you played, this is for everyone at home and also for you and me as well, Daniel, how many times have you played or seen someone play a Survivor that put in brute force or sharp vision and didn't plan to use it because the card was just that good, but you had nothing else to put into your deck? And it's like, yeah, Tony is going to just use my brute force, right? And I think that's, like I said, that's good for the team part of the game, but I think it actually is an issue when you really just like put it under a microscope.
Yeah, I've done this before. I've seen you do it all the time, and it feels kind of fun in the moment. You're like, aha, I have this. But it also just feels kind of weird. It's like that was the best I could contribute with upgrading my deck. Like it wasn't really geared towards making my deck any better, but it was helping the team. Yeah.
All right, we're gonna keep this going. Is it good or bad that most of the 4+ level Survivor cards are permanent cards? And I'll start with this one because I think you actually set this up pretty good. I think it's bad. I think it's good for the power of the cards, but I can just buy Dark Horse 5 and not be a Dark Horse deck and just be like, I'm gonna get value of this because, right? And then what it does is because you only have to usually, apart from some cool exceptions like Quick Learner, you only need to buy one of them, right? And then you're set. Dark Horse Scrapper, 8 XP, deck's done, right? Quick Learner, you have to put down 8, which is a bigger difference, but still, with Stella Clark, you put down 8 XP and your deck's like practically ready to rock at that point, which is kind of crazy. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's bad. And it's one of those things where you said you felt at the beginning of this video that you were doing a crazy conspiracy theory. I didn't notice this myself until we started to talk about this video. I was like, what's going on? Why are they all permanent cards? I don't think that makes for an interesting deck archetype. You know, it feels like I said putting Observed in just because why not? There's no downside, right?
Yep. Yeah, and so, that is why Gift of Nodens not being permanent is nice, because it's a build around that you have to find like other people. Survivors are probably better at finding it compared to some of like non-seeker classes, but still, right? Like it's you have to dig for it.
Yeah. On your own, it's level 3, but kind of fits in the same boat here. The permanent version, I think, is interesting too, because that is a build around, because it does have a downside. You can't have allies in your deck, well, ones that take up ally slots, and that's interesting. And you really have to be building towards the idea that you're getting the resource benefit off that card. But again, it's, I don't know, it's another permanent card, and probably is out of the pool anyway, being part of a return too.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because like if you look at like, for example, Gift of Nodens, and you compare it to Sharpshooter, and I think this comes to the power of Survivor cards. Like Gift of Nodens is an exception. I think this card is kind of crazy powerful, and Sharpshooter on the opposite side isn't. I guess another example is Fence. I think that's one that people play more, right? That you have to find. A Survivor deck that is Gift of Nodens will not miss Gift of Nodens if it's not there. Like they're gonna want it, but it's not like their deck is you relying on it for economy, right? With Fence and Sharpshooter, it's your solution to a problem, and everything else builds around it. It's like what Travis said about Transfiguration, where like if you're not that person, then like what's your deck doing, right? So you kind of have to build this weird deck. Survivors are just so good, again, because of how things are compressed for their power level, that they can get by without it, which is interesting.
Ooh, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that with Gift of Nodens, but you're right. I mean, so when I played it in my George deck, I didn't always find it right away.
Yeah.
But it's actually kind of okay because you're setting up the Gift
Yeah.
of Nodens play later
Yeah.
by seeding your discard pile if you don't have short supply or you didn't get skills in there anyway. So it's like kind of okay. Man, I mean, the card's crazy. I mean, this isn't a Gift of Nodens video. Well, it is a 5 XP card, so maybe it is. But have you thought about playing this card in other investigators and, I mean, other than Silas? And
I mean, I'm gonna play it in Silas next. I played it in George, and I was like, I had a huge red flag go up. I was like, is this card a problem? And I need to strip away the George benefit, because it is true, George gets an extra benefit. But like, I think the reality is do I want to spend 5 XP, maybe 10 when I get later on, to get more value out of all of my incredible cards? Because, as we said slides ago, Survivor's true power is that they are not playing these cards once. So I think that ultimately, if I was going to play Gift of Nodens, I could play it in anyone who could run it, because at a certain point, I just want to play my Brute Force, my Sharp Vision, my Resourceful to get my lucky 3s back, right? At the cost of just discarding a card that is not one of those things. In the long term, it's probably good enough that Survivors can just run it as a one-of going forward.
Yeah, I'd like to play it in Patrice. I think anyone who runs a lot of draw, right, can make that discard a card thing not a big deal. If you're running improvised cards, also not a big deal.
Yep.
It just fits in so much with a lot of what Survivor wants to do. Again, I don't want this to be the Gift of Nodens video, but it really kind of is. That this is what we're looking for all these years. It's such an interesting card. Is it a problem? That's actually kind of the answer to the question of is it a problem has to do with, well, what do other classes get for 5 XP? Maybe this is fine because you can do crazy things with every other class too. So this is just a relevant capstone for what Survivor cards look like.
Yeah, and maybe this is just the issue where this is the first like Survivor 5 card that should have been Survivor 6, right? Like maybe it gets a +1, right? Like maybe that's one of the things, but they can't discover what a 5 XP Survivor non-permanent card is until they start printing them, right?
Because we've never seen one before.
Exactly, right? Yeah, like, and I think that's why I hope they continue to expand on the class, because I think ultimately it's going to be really good. We're going to touch on that again in a bit, but let's jump to the next one here, which we kind of already started to talk about. Do Survivors start to feel samey with so few high-level build-around cards in their kit? And yes, yeah, I agree as well. I mean, I think for my play pattern, for people when I build decks, what I'm doing without any sort of weird stipulations, most of my decks are the same. You'll see that I put in like the same cards no matter who I'm playing if I'm building just for me. But I do think that Survivors have the least variety when it comes to the weird builds, which is funny because they have a lot of bad cards that are fun to build around. But I think that it's so easy with Survivors to end up just falling into the one asset brute force loop, even if you're not trying to.
The other part of it to me is that the archetypes, unlike the other classes to me, synergize with each other very, very well.
Yes.
And like not failing tests because you're playing lucky is obviously really good. Spending resources to pass tests with Scrapper, Plucky, etc., really good. But the discard recursion stuff feeds into each other. So many things actually just say, do the thing you want to do already, and you're only limited by maybe deck space. You talked about how I think Yorick plays the ample supplies very well as just resource generation. And you might say, well, sure, he's playing the get an asset into play from the discard pile thing, but the discard something from play or from your hand, which ample supplies wants you to do, he can just run cornered. He can run all sorts of things that get assets in the discard pile so he can recur them in the first place. So he's not unhappy to do some of these things that he's not necessarily built for, like other investigators that care more about discarding from hand.
Yeah. And I mean, we're even about to go down a slippery slope here, but like, what if you added Gift of Nodens into that deck, right? Like, then we're going to this exact same kind of like issue where suddenly now, because the archetypes feed in so well to each other, why wouldn't I want to play Last Chance 3 and Brute Forces Will York, and Gift of Nodens is an asset, so if I discard it to my short supply, I can play it, right? Or I can discard it to my cornered and then play it, right? Like, it's these kind of like, because recursion
I'll
is so
discard
good.
this cherished keepsake from my hand to recur resourceful from the discard pile. Oh no, whatever will I do with that asset in the discard pile?
Yeah, it is. It's one of those things where, because it's compressed to be so low level experience, that the cards just kind of, it's easy to put the same cards in each time. This then continues. Does the strength of level 0 cards impact upgrading the deck? Is it harder to upgrade the deck, cut cards, and make room for the higher level cards? And I think the answer to that is also yes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would never cut resourceful. Never.
Right. You can't do that. And then there's a lot of things that just don't have upgrades, right? That maybe they don't need them. I mean, we saw Fire Axe and Mariner's Compass that were not exactly the things people were clamoring for. But I suspect we don't need upgraded nautical charts anytime soon. It's just already really good. So you have to keep a lot of cards in your core. A lot of level 0. Oh, I know I wanted to look this up. How many level 3 to 5 skills are there in Survivor? I want to say it's just Last Chance. Is that right?
I think so.
It is. It's Last Chance, Rise to the Occasion, and then Grizzled, if you can make that any more. Yeah, so like you want to leave all of those in because that's your whole skill package, right? If George or Silas or whoever else is playing the skill deck, you can't upgrade them too much. There's just not that many skills to begin with anyway, but they can't get any better than what you already have.
Yeah, and I think that's I think an example of this is, I'll put in Scrounge for supplies in my level 0 deck as I'm going to upgrade out of this, and I feel like I accomplished something, right? Because, but the reality is that you're not really actually like doing anything because of that. It's also, like, for example, another one is End of the Road. Incredible level 0 card, and I'll usually end up still with one at the end of the final scenario because it is that extra action which survivors want, and it's like worth it at level 0, and it's hard for you to cut. And I think that even Bryn, with his Forced Learning George Barnaby deck, was like, I don't want to cut any more cards because the level 0 versions are just so good.
Can I say something crazy?
Yeah.
I think the new card that discovers clues, Contemplative, is, I mean, it's super strong, but compare it to Sharp Vision. It's kind of the same card. Yeah. It just doesn't give you an icon. It too gets you an extra clue. So does Sharp Vision. I mean, you can add Sharp Vision in anyway, because you can just make another spot in your deck for it, I suppose. But you're not really going to cut Contemplative for Sharp Vision because it's not really any better.
No, it's, unless you're doing like it's like nothing. Like, I think the only way you would do it is if you were going to add Sharp Vision to the thing, right? Like, it was also going to be Sharp Vision. But now, like, here's where things get like funky and crazy, where you only save 2 XP. Not putting Sharp Vision in, right? So it's like, it's not even like I don't need to upgrade into Deduction 2 because I'm only playing 2-player, right? If I'm going to upgrade my deductions, which is like, once again, where we get to this weird nuttiness where it's like, good, congratulations, you spent 2 XP. I hope you didn't have a plan for that, right? Like, it's kind of crazy to come with it.
I think Sharp Vision's even awkward nowadays with nautical charts because you can't combine it, right? It has to be basic investigate. So maybe it fits into a different deck. But
yeah, well, I mean, I think Sharp Vision was always like the whole Sharp Vision brute force thing is very interesting because it was one of the first times, it was that along with Spectral Razor, where they got it right, you know, where for 1 XP it has to be +2 damage. Thank God, but I think there's a big gap between them because there's not really like a brute force equivalent. Like, yeah, there's Long Shot, but like Long Shot doesn't deal 3 to something, and that's a big difference. But you're 100% right on Sharp Vision and Contemplative. Yeah. Okay. This next one I think is very interesting. Does the Survivor's myriad of odd mechanics add to this problem? So this is something that Travis actually brought up, and you haven't heard this, I don't think, because it happens during Survivor Week. But Travis is actually has come to terms with the fact that he is actually a big fan of this weird Survivor thing because of the synergies between them that are there to discover. And he thinks that like this is actually better longer term for the survivors because suddenly you actually can like discover things and build things and feel like that scrapping together survivor style that they're trying to go for. So maybe in theory, the idea is less that you're building one cohesive deck as a survivor, but you're rather just like taking bits and pieces and putting stuff together and seeing what sticks. However, yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
I, however, don't really vibe with that philosophy too much. Like, I agree from the design standpoint, it's true, but I think that unfortunately, every one of these like these archetypes, like Deja Vu, is missing pieces to really make it like worthwhile. And I think that dilemmas, which was like which Katja Eastbank is here to represent, aren't really like. There's the good ones like that people like to play at a crossroads. But even then, I look at that card and I actually see the opposite of what we've been talking about, which is the there's a level 0 card that does that, right? That does that for me. So why would I want that when I can just find a level 0 version of the card? So like to me, they're missing that little bit. So I don't think they add to this problem. I think they actually compound and make the problem. I think they do add to the problem. They don't help the problem. They make it worse because there's now cards that I'm not even going to touch because my upgrading sensibilities don't want to add stuff that aren't complete and super helpful in my mind.
Yeah. Okay. So what I was going to say was you've seen me play, and most of you haven't seen this yet, but the sealed Patrice run, where essentially I have a bunch of random things to put into the deck, and I'm still gravitating towards kind of the same stuff I would play anywhere else. Granny Orn level 3, right? And it's hard to put in the incomplete stuff because I don't think it really does pay off in this sort of, I could use any of these things at any time. I don't know. That just doesn't, I don't vibe with that exactly either. Maybe I'd like to see it in action. Like I've seen lots of good scrappy decks that can do a lot of stuff, but I think they can do a lot of stuff with the cards that are kind of, I don't want to just say the staples, but I don't think there is a high XP card that says do a bunch of weird things other than even Dark Horse. I think that is kind of the card that says be a scrappy player. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a shame about Deja Vu because they haven't printed an exile card that's like really notable in a while. I think that's like maybe if it was 4 XP or if it was 5 XP, but it was like 4 cards. I don't know. It's even like you said, you're just buying to like grab the stuff that's back. I tried a Daniela exile deck and like it was good, but I think it was good because it was Daniela.
Right.
And then I ended up just using Fire Extinguisher 3 and just hitting things in the face with it. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I think there should be some more interesting... So Burn After Reading has the whole Remove a Doom from the agenda. That's kind of cool way to deal with the exile mechanic. But ultimately, I think these cards, it's a lot of setup.
Yes.
For not a payoff, right? The payoff is fine, but it's actually... Given what we've talked about, your deck can be somewhat cohesive at level 0. What did this stuff add? Like, you already have the problem at level 0 of I need to get clues, fight enemies, evade things, do whatever scenario tests there are. Does this help me do that more than I could have done at level 0? Absolutely not.
Yeah. Yeah.
I haven't seen a card that says, okay, this is the whole archetype's linchpin of where you can do something differently than what you would have done with some other cards at level 0.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, well, I think I know the answer to this one. This one should be pretty simple. Would the class benefit from more level 4 and or 5 cards, or is the class in a good place? And I think we both agree it would benefit from more. Specifically non-permanents.
Yeah, I think it would. It's I think the class is good. It's interesting as it is, but I don't think it's good when your players are like, what do I upgrade into, right?
Yeah.
There's something wrong if, just from a gameplay perspective or outside of the gameplay itself, but the dealing with deck building portion of the game, which I think is huge. There's something wrong if your players are like, I don't know what to do.
Yes. Yeah.
That just feels strange.
Yeah. I think that also just we're actually at a very important point, which is going to come to our next and last topic of discussion. But I think this is a good part to kind of just like change the survivor class identity a bit. And I think that continuing to add 4 and 5 XP cards that are not permanent, that are fun to build around, or just exciting, I think are going to be good for the class as a whole. And I don't think the class is in a bad place, but I think it could be in a better place. So then this goes to our last topic. Oh, sorry?
Yeah, I'm going to ask the question on this last question here to you. So what does the class look like to you in sort of a redesign without losing some of its core identity? I think a lot of people would be sad or disappointed if resourceful isn't reprinted in some fashion.
I think they gotta kill it. They just have to. I think resourceful has been an issue since. I don't want to say Dream Eaters, but I think like basically once the skills came in, the Dream Eater skills, but I think it was even a problem before that. I think what like they need to do is they need to stop. I mean, I was gonna say they need to stop recursion, but they just added a very powerful recursion card into the game. But I do think that with going forward, there needs to be. I mean, Survivor is still very scrappy. If you look at just Drowned City as just like an individual slice, and ignore the fact that it actually completed a lot of weird odds and ends that Survivors had, it still has that same like scrappy Survivor nature, right? Where they have the cycle of everything but active desperation. And for like that's really nice for it. So I think like that part is going to stay, but I do think that Survivor needs to drop low level recursion. Like if they reprinted a resourceful but it was like level 2, like it would probably be a much better place for the Survivor class and for the game as a whole. Because it's just scavenging is in the core set, so you can't change that, right? But scavenging, I think we can all agree with the taboo list, feels much better at 2 XP. So I feel like recursion should start hitting those levels, and that's what I would like the class to be going forward. Also, to be a little bit less value oriented. They're so strong, but again, taking the slice down, I think they actually outcompete a lot of Seekers for clue potential now as well.
I think so too. What do you think Gift of Nodens looks like without a level 0 resourceful?
I think it'll do a good job of really curbing what the card can do. It also loses Scroll of Secrets when we go into current, which is another very big dangerous part. And what I actually enjoy, if you take out everything and you look at current and Gift of Nodens, I think the card is completely reasonable and fair. It's also why I think we're going to see less taboo lists going forward in the future, because current is going to really cut things down. And they might do like legacy style taboo list stuff, potentially, but I think the idea is they want as little headspace thinking about all those past interactions. So now with Gift of Nodens, instead of using resourceful to kind of like recur things, you will have to look instead of things like, it just slipped my mind, the skill that shuffles things back in there. Perseverance? No, not persistent?
Persistence, yeah.
Yeah, persistence. Like that is now how you can potentially pay off a Gift of Nodens loop by finding like other ways to do it, which I think in the long term is better, because Gift of Nodens you can discard to do the to do the trigger for Gift of Nodens and then play it from there. So it's like finding different forms of value that's just not the same thing we've been using from the beginning of the game.
Yeah, I think the actionless recursion is the biggest problem. I would like to see scrounge for supplies or something like that still exist. But it's the fact that you can just take a skill test with resourceful in your hand, or the discard pile for that matter, and pick out anything. Scavenging kind of is the same problem, right? Where you're picking up something during progressing the game. So I'd like to see still this idea of recursion, but they need to tone it down a bit where you're just not able to do it without um, any other opportunity loss, right? Because it feels just so easy to throw resourceful into literally 3 different kinds of tests that you probably can pass,
Or someone else can
and
pass.
or someone else can pass. That's another one. They could limit it to just a test that you do. And I think they compounded this with Scarlet Keys. I know you wrote about this being a mistake, or you talked about this being a mistake earlier in the week, and probably you continue to do so in videos I haven't seen yet. But the test at 0 stuff was just not okay.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and that's it's interesting that we talked about what does a level 4 or 5 card look like, and yeah, Ulkid Ring 4 is more appropriate in power level, but they thankfully haven't revisited the other bits and pieces of the deck that make recursion of those powerful cards so easy since then. So like, I don't want to see a level 5 card that's like reduce the difficulty of something to 0. Yes, Quick Learner does this, but it was okay before there was such a big payoff.
Yes.
With the other cards like Shadow Light in particular too.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I think why current is going to be such an interesting thing for all classes is if Shadow Light was existed in a world without resourceful, I think it would have been a lot better, right? Because Shadow Light is good when you play it for the first time, but it starts getting nutty when you've played it 3 times in the campaign. To go back to what this whole video is kind of about for XP cards, survivors just aren't playing their cards once, which is why it's so interesting to look at low-level survivor XP cards, because if other classes could play their things over and over again, like, for example, Breaking and Entering 2 and Spectral Razor 2, right? These are cards that people like playing again and again, because it turns out basically every time you play it, you're essentially adding, like, you're getting an extra free XP in your deck for that scenario. And that's what it comes down to.
And it's not that they've shied away from the idea entirely, right? Book of War now exists, which is expensive, right? It's does have limited uses too. Takes up a hand slot in Guardian. I don't know, like, is our conclusion from this video that the problem with the XP cards, the lack of XP cards, is the fact that there's too much power in the level 0 decks, that things could have been, they could have fixed this problem by not going down that route to begin with?
I think so. To me, it's what I always say for Survivor, but I think the biggest issue with Survivor and all these things, it comes down to recursion, because I do think that scavenging and like that choice at the beginning to have this all be level 3 has created problems that weren't foreseeable at the time, right? Just like how recursion can create problems that aren't foreseeable at the time, right? So I think for me, the conclusion to this XP conundrum is that Survivor would benefit from more XP cards and like less strength at level 0.
Yeah, exactly. So that's want to make sure we weren't talking out of both sides of our mouths by saying, we're missing some level 4 and 5 cards. Wouldn't it be better if they had them? And then also saying, look how awfully horrible it is that they have these great level 0 cards, right? These things go together. As you said, that was part of the design space. So I agree. I think the class, well, was an identity, is an identity to be that way in the first place, but it might just be a mistake long term.
I think it's like, also what's fun about these videos is we have like a concept for the video. We like the videos go through like multiple lives, and making the template was very eye-opening for this video. Our discussion between it was very eye-opening, and I had another eye-opening thing while recording this video where the issue with the only survivors being 3 is that Survivor 3 is kind of Survivor 5. So if this was stretched out over the long term in this game, and there was always Survivor level 0 to Survivor level 5, I think we would see a lot of things change for how they XP things in the future, including some level 0 cards. Because even though it would have broken the cycle, and this is also why cycle design can be a little bit issue. I'm not talking about like an individual cycle, but Eureka, Inspiring Presence, Torrent of Power, what's the rogue one? Watch This, and then Resourceful, right? Three of the other four are good. Three of the other four are good cards, right? Like I play Watch This all the time. I play Eureka all the time. I play Inspiring Presence all the time. But one of them, Resourceful, is head and shoulders above the best. You also see this with Magic the Gathering. When their first cycle, there's a card in Magic which is like prevent the next 3 damage that someone takes or heal 3 damage for 1 white. Nothing happened. The frickin' black one. Gain 3 mana for 1 black. The red one, deal 3 damage to something, right? Like, when you have these cycles, there's going to be inherent imbalance, and if they didn't have to do that, but they also were able to maybe Resourceful should be a 1 experience card, it would have solved a lot of these problems, I think.
Agreed. Well, I have nothing else to contribute to this video. This was a really fun time talking about this with you, Justin.
Yeah, it was a blast, and I hope all of you at home enjoyed this. This is the last class week that we have, but we do have some more stuff coming up in the near future for another theme week, so look forward to that. But in the meantime, let us know in the comments, did this make you start to think a little bit about the Survivor card pool and about their XP cards? Because I'll tell you right now, this was probably one of the most interesting videos for me to cook up, and I really enjoyed what you added to all the planning as well, Daniel, because this has been a very interesting topic to kind of bite into.
Yeah, we've talked about it for several weeks, I think, and there was a lot of research that went into this, a lot of thinking behind the scenes. So you did a great job with setting this all up, though. I think it was some fantastic points that we got to have a good discussion about. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the history of the Survivor class tomorrow. I'm sure we're going to touch on a lot of these topics again, especially recursion. So get ready for that. But thanks for watching, everybody. Have a good one. And as always, GG's.